Hello, and welcome to the session, One Size Does Not Fit All, Making Open Textbooks More Accessible. I'm your moderator, Tracy Stout, and before we get the session started, I have just a few logistical items to mention. Our live captioning is available during this presentation, and please find the link located for that under the Handouts tab. This session will be recorded and provided within this event portal in this session following the symposium. A copy of the PowerPoint presentation will be provided under the Handouts tab. Please enter all your questions into the Q&A box, and I will do my best to relay that to Judy, who's our speaker today, when the time seems appropriate. We do encourage you to engage with us and the other attendees throughout this discussion forum. And there is one poll question during the session, and so you'll be able to participate in those under the polls tab. If you have any technical issues, the MEC staff are behind the scenes to provide support, so be sure to reach out through the live support button. Now I would like to introduce our speaker, Judy Schmitt. Judy is currently a reference librarian at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and prior to her obtaining her MLIS, Judy spent nearly 25 years in the publishing industry as a layout professional and designer of higher education textbooks. In her last few years in that industry, she focused on preparing books for digital publication. And now I would like to turn the stage over to Judy. Judy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session, One Size Does Not Fit All. I created this session couple months because I was working on trying to make a PDF accessible. It's a statistics book, and it was not accessible. All of the math was done very kind of haphazardly, and it just was not accessible. So my goal was to try to create an accessible document from that, and I'm ending up having to redo the entire book with math in an accessible format, which I'll talk about a bit later. As Tracy mentioned, I got my library degree in 2017, but before that, I spent a lot of time in the publishing industry. In around 2009, I began incorporating accessibility requirements on Elsevier titles. It was very time-consuming and detailed, but I loved it. But that means, it does not mean that I am an expert in accessibility. I focused on print textbooks for most of my career and never from a creator standpoint, meaning I only incorporated accessibility to the extent required by publishers using the processes they'd already established. So my talk today is going to concentrate on OERs that are more traditional in nature, similar to those I'm experienced with, rather than things like course modules, texts, videos, that kind of thing. And before I move forward, I want to apologize profusely for the lack of images in this presentation. For a designer, I am surprisingly wordy in my documents. So I don't know how that happens, but it did in this case. I actually tried to make this presentation, the PowerPoint, accessible. So I was using larger type, fewer lines of type, and the images just were an afterthought that never actually materialized. So I apologize for that. Yeah, I've gone through this slide. That's an old picture of me. And here's my poll question. I am curious to know whether you make your documents accessible, not just your OERs, but also syllabi, handouts, and presentations. If you have comments, feel free to add them in chat. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on this, to see what you all are doing. I'll give you just a couple minutes. And I'll mention too that I hate to admit it, but in my last full-time layout job, my coworkers and I used to gripe about how many extra hoops we had to jump through when creating math equations, which may or may not be something that you have to encounter yourself. We never really understood why it was such a hard thing and why we had to follow such specific rules, because the tools we wanted to use to make things pretty weren't necessarily the right tools to make things accessible. But I do now understand the reason for those steps, and yeah, it's daunting.
All right, and looks like we have some results in. Judy, it looks like 48% said yes, a little accessible, with a close following 30% yes, very accessible.
Great. So you guys might know actually more than I do. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. We're just going to go into a little bit of detail about why accessibility matters, and then I'm going to list some of the standards that are in place that you could follow. I'm going to touch on the 4 principles of accessibility, not going into too much detail, and then I'll follow up with options for publication, dissemination, and design. Okay, so why should you care about accessibility? Your ultimate goal should be textbooks that are fully accessible, readable, and navigable by all. I say ultimate goal because accessibility is not binary. It's not an all or nothing thing. There are multiple definitions of accessibility depending on the standard or level you try to meet. It's not just people with disabilities who benefit from accessibility documents. Even non-disabled people can benefit from descriptive hyperlinks, video transcripts, and images with better contrast. And also, accessibility encourages empathy-driven design. We want to eliminate exclusion, and sometimes the circumstances that prompt exclusion are temporary or even situational. Like a person could be blind, which is a permanent disability. They might have an eye infection or an eye injury, which is temporary, or they might have just gotten their eyes dilated at the eye doctor, and that's situational. So you want to make things accessible to people across the spectrum. People need accessible documents if they use assistive technology. Assistive technology includes screen readers, refreshable braille displays, text-to-speech and other literacy software, and screen magnifiers, among many others. People who are colorblind or have other visual or cognitive disabilities also need accessible documents. And there's more than one type of color blindness. Most of us are familiar with the red-green colorblind. There are a few others that I'll talk about a little bit later. Also, people are using digital well-being features on their computers that change the screen color in the evening to kind of rest their eyes a bit. So accessibility could be important for them as well. Also, some people have eye tracking issues or learning disorders such as dyslexia, and these users can find it difficult to follow a line of text and benefit from large, easy-to-read fonts and added line spacing. Lastly, small screens are another issue. PDFs can be problematic for these users since they have to zoom in and can only see a small portion of a page at any given time. Here are the accessibility standards I just wanted to touch on. My goal is to introduce these and offer a few links where you can find more information, but like I said earlier, I'm not going to go into all of the details. It's just too much. So WIKEG 2.1 is the latest version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's got 3 levels, AA, and AAA, with AAA being the strictest level, the one requiring the most effort to achieve compliance. WIKEG 2.2 is expected to release this summer in 2021. In terms of PDF standards, ISO 32000 is the umbrella standard for producing a conventional PDF for a broad range of users. Then on top of that, you can build using the WIKEG 2.0 with the PDF techniques recommended by that standard. And then lastly, the PDF UA provides a set of guidelines for creating PDFs that are universally acceptable, the UA. These, again, are the most stringent and time-consuming guidelines. Making sure that your documents are accessible can be daunting, so check to see if your institution has people who can help you with that. Okay, so WIKEG is useful for multiple publication types, not just the web, even though that's part of the name. So The WIKEG quick reference, I'm going to just briefly show that to you. This is what it looks like. It's just got the different levels here, level A and double A, and it also has techniques for how to meet these standards and then what causes failures in those standards. And then back to PDF. And then there's a much wordier version of WIKEG that I'm linking to here that I'm not going to show you just because I don't want to overwhelm you. Okay, so for accessible PDFs, there's no way to completely automate the process, which is why it's so time consuming and labor intensive. And why, when I was working on Elsevier titles, I kind of expected the prices of these books to skyrocket because there was just no way for us to do it inexpensively. There are some key accessibility requirements. Chief among these is tagging PDFs. You want to have PDFs that have style sheets that link to different tags so that the structure is completely built out. The basic structure is what allows screen readers to jump between elements so that all of the H1s are listed and people can jump from H1 to H1 to get a kind of a bird's eye view of the document before they drill down. Reading order, it enables assistive technology users to experience the document and its elements in the same order that a sighted person would. It's similar to what you might know as the stacking order, but it's not exactly the same. And a lot of times the reading order is, it follows the tags as well. Color contrast is important, and I'm going to go into this in more detail later, so I'm just going to kind of hop over it here. Meaningful hyperlinks should be clear and concise descriptions of what the user will see on the linked page. Again, screen reader users can jump from link to link by hitting tab, or they can press a hotkey to bring up a list of possible links. So you want them you want these hyperlinks to make sense at a glance. Tables, you'll want to define column and row headers so that users of screen readers can successfully orient themselves from within each cell. Lists, when set up correctly, a screen reader will announce how many items are in the list before it reads them, which can help the user. And then bookmarks or tables of contents can aid navigability. To test a document's accessibility, you can go to the accessibility checker in Acrobat, which I'm going to show you just briefly here so you can get a sense of what it looks like. Bear with me while it loads. Oh, well, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so anyway, it's going to be able to show you exactly the tagging structure. So you'll see the H1s, you'll see all of the P elements for paragraph, all of that. And again, all of that is done because it was styled correctly in the source document. Microsoft and PowerPoint also have check accessibility feature. And I'm not going to show you that either, but it's easy to find. You just have to look for, I think on a Mac, it's in the Tools menu, and on a PC, you might have to go to the Tell Us What You Want to Do feature. Oops, sorry. You can also test documents accessibility by viewing it directly using a screen reader. Some options on this: NVDA is a free open source software that supports multiple languages. It's for Windows only. JAWS is a proprietary, meaning fee-driven, but highly configurable software, and it outputs to Braille display, and it again is Windows only. And then VoiceOver is free for use on Apple products. I personally have not yet used any of these. My goal when I return to the library full-time is to get NVDA on my office computer. Right now I'm on a Mac at home, and I just don't want to get too familiar with the Mac one, since it's not what I'm going to mostly use for work. So to test, to figure out how to do the accessibility, how to make documents more accessible, you can go to lynda.com. It offers numerous videos on accessibility and a few on PDF remediation, or the term for making things accessible. And it's free to many public library cardholders. Common Look is also a company that remediates PDFs for a fee, but their website has a number of free training webinars that are available on demand. The 4 principles of accessibility are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable means that information and user interface must be presented to users in ways that they can perceive. It can't be invisible to all of their senses. Operable means that the interface and navigation must be operable. In a case of a PDF, this might mean including a table of contents that has active links to the content. For understandable, it means that users must be able to understand the information as well as the operation of the user interface. And robust means that as technologies and user agents evolve, the content should remain accessible. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on how to address these specific components, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. For the perceivable component, you want to provide text alternatives for any non-text content that can be changed into other forms that people need, such as large print, Braille, speech, symbols, or simpler language. Include alt text for images and transcripts for audio and video files. For images, you want to describe them with a point of view or a focus. So if your OER is about architectural design, there's no need to mention the mime that's performing in front of the Arc de Triomphe. You just want to focus on what that particular OER cares about. You also don't need to supply alt text for elements that are purely decorative. For adaptable, you want to create content that can be presented in different ways, such as a simpler layout, without losing information or structure. Think about all the visual cues you notice when looking at a page in a textbook. You see headings, space between paragraphs, text emphasized with bold or italic type, content in a colored box, maybe even a sidebar definition with lines above and below it. You need to convert all of those visual cues into something that is perceivable by users with visual limitations. For example, you might want to refer to figures by number instead of by position relative to the mention in the text. So you would say, see figure 3.2 instead of see the figure below. For distinguishable, you want to make it easier for readers to see and hear content, including separating foreground from background. Examples of this are color, contrast, and text size. And I'll have more on this to come in a couple slides. So this math and chemical equations, these are things that not everybody will have to deal with, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time with this, but I did want to introduce it to you. This image file that I've included here, the 2 times 4y plus 1 equals 3y, I created that in math type and set it as an image with alt text in my PowerPoint. The reason I did it in math type was because not all screen readers will be able to read this exactly as it needs to be read to be understood. by someone actually doing the formula. You want to open and close certain types of information, such as factors, which is the 4y plus 1, that's a factor. Also radicals, such as square roots and cubed roots. Fractions, you need to define the numerator and the denominator. And exponents, the superscript and the subscript. I'm going to show you just briefly what MathML is. So for this image here, this x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 0, this is the math type, or the MathML for that equation. You can see that it's very code driven. And I'm not going to explain what it all means because I don't yet understand what it all means, but that's what it looks like. And that's how you need to approach things. HTML is not sufficient for math, just so you know. Okay, so handling charts and graphs is another issue. This is going to be pretty common in OERs. A lot of the charts and graphs that you'll find in open sources are not accessible. So you might consider having them redrawn or redrawing them yourself. Some guidelines to follow. For pie charts, you're going to want to break up colors with a white stroke. So they have a white stroke between the colors. This can help users differentiate between the different areas. You could also consider using patterns for some of the areas, but don't go pattern crazy. Use them responsibly. For line graphs, consider using dots of different shapes, such as squares and triangles, and also varying line weights and styles. So having dashed lines, dotted lines, different weighted lines. For bar charts, don't use gradient fills or 3D effects. And don't use multiple colors unless you need to for clarity. If there are labels on the x-axis, a lot of times you don't need to have different colors for each label. You can rely on the user to see that label and know that it's a different, that bar means something different. For all chart types, especially for line graphs, you want to label them directly. And let me show you one example of that. So this is what you want to do. You want to label each line directly so that people don't have to scroll over possibly to see the key. This page actually gives you a lot of ideas on how to do these things that I've mentioned. So the white strokes between the areas in a pie chart, and it's showing them with the different color blindness filters as well. But I'll go into more detail on that in a bit. And I have there is a link to this page, in your the PDF or the PowerPoint. And then for alt text for charts, this is a handy little formula to follow. So an example of this would of this chart type of data showing reason for including chart would be line graph of the number of bananas sold per day in the last year, showing more banana sales occurred during the winter months. Data from the USDA with USDA as a link. It's a good idea to do this short alt text for the image and then describe or go into more detail in the text so that people are able to see this chart and then also get the screen reader to read them, the details of what it pertains to. You don't have to go into, details about, this bar graph goes up to this particular number value, but you do have to give them the overall, what you're trying to say by showing this image. Moving on to the operable component, You want to make sure that all functionality is available from a keyboard. You want to provide users time enough to read and use the content. Don't design content in a way that is known to cause seizures or physical reactions. And this is going to be hard to do in a PDF, but it's more pertaining to web design and web books, things like that. Provide ways to help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are in your document or website. This would be like a navigable TOC. Also make it easier for users to operate functionality through various inputs beyond the keyboard. Moving on to the understandable component, you want to make text content readable and understandable, make web pages appear and operate in predictable ways, and help users avoid and correct mistakes. And then the robust component, content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assisted technologies. Screen readers surprisingly don't always read what's on the screen, and I will show you the article that I'm talking about here. This was a surprise to me when I started doing the statistics textbook, because I had a lot of subscripts in it, and I learned that not all screen readers will read them as a subscript. They'll just say 2 instead of telling you that it's a subscript number 2. So the NVDA screen readers don't necessarily translate asterisks and plus symbols correctly. JAWS will say 5-2 instead of 5-2, that kind of thing. So you have to be aware of this, and that's one reason why you want to test them in a screen reader, so that you know if you need to provide alt text, you know exactly what you want it to say. Also, you want to make sure that content is compatible with future and current technologies, including assistive technologies. For publication and dissemination options, you can use a variety of different publication or creation tools, and I went over a lot of this in my presentation yesterday, so you might want to look that up for more information. There's also a video that I'm linking to here. I'm not going to show it to you, but it gives you some ideas on how to create open text, open educational resources. You want to consider the type of content, the subject, and the end users. And you want to make sure that you do periodic updates on them to keep them all current. For publication options, you can use a simple Word doc, a PDF, HTML, webbook, or ebook. And again, this was in my presentation yesterday. For dissemination, I want to plug Lena Marvin's presentation on OER sharing that's going to take place later today at 1 o'clock. So look that up. You want to make sure that you go beyond your LMS. There's multiple options for sharing your work, and Lena will go into plenty of those in her talk. Okay, then for design and design considerations. Colors and contrasts. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes. Hang on a second. You want to make sure that you use specific colors and contrast. I'll show you a bit more about this in a couple slides, but charts and infographics are especially important for this because in these types of things, color often plays such an important part. You want to make sure that it's something that is translatable to people with differing abilities. Also, text size and column width. Some people have eye tracking issues, so you want to make sure that your text doesn't go beyond a certain width. Again, you'll want to refer to my OER design presentation that I gave yesterday. And then headings can be differentiated with fonts, colors, different sizes, and styles. So for choosing a color palette, I'm going to give you a couple of options here. And I've got links to all of these where you can go to either see the website live, or Color Oracle is an option for a screen overlay. So let's see, I'll go to the web for the first one. This one is nice because it gives you options of how many colors you want to use. And it takes the first one and the last one and then creates a middle point for those. So you can go up to 8 different ones. You can change to a different level. I'm just gonna, to kind of use the codes here. So you can see that it adjusted it on the fly. And then it goes and shows you some options of how this would look in the real world. Okay, and then the next one I wanted to show you was this color palette by Patternfly. I like this one because it gives you how it looks with black and then with white. So you kind of have an idea of the contrast. The ones toward the middle are harder to see, to differentiate. The ones on the extremes are the ones that have the better contrast. And it has multiple colors. And then the Color Oracle that I mentioned on the slide, it's a full screen overlay that simulates colorblind vision. And I'm hoping that this will translate over the on air. It lists several different types of color blindness, and then also if there's no color at all that people can see. So if I change this to deuteranopia, this is how these colors look with this type of color blindness. Go to this one, which is rare, and then this one, which is very rare. And then this is how it looks as just grayscale. The hard thing about this particular thing is that once you've tried to scroll or do anything with the website, it kind of disappears, but you can get it back either with the key command or by going up to the menu. So that's something that I really like doing. All right, back, and that again, that was Color Oracle. And then for color contrast, to analyze them, the one that I use most often is the one by Paciello Group, the Color Contrast Analyzer. I will actually, let me go back to this page so that I can show you how it looks. So if I open the Color Contrast Analyzer, I sure hope this is all visible to you all. So you can choose a foreground color. So I can go to the eyedropper here and go into, I'll just do white. And then for the background color, I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to choose, let's go for a middle one here, this orange. So this is telling me that it's failing on all levels and at all sizes. So I want to change this one to something that would work better. So let's try this one. This one is passing if the text is large enough and if it's a non-contrast graphical object. To get it to pass, I would want something even darker. So let's go with this one. And this one is passing on all levels. So this is a nice way to do checking your PDFs. It works on PDFs. It works on pretty much anything. There's a little bit of an issue setting it up. I couldn't get it to actually use the eyedropper the first time, and it was because I had a Mac with the latest operating system. I had to do a little bit extra. So if you have any questions about how to get this working, just let me know. And back to my PowerPoint. I'm going to close the color contrast analyzer. Then there's some other resources that you can check out here as well. And then those were my references, and I am really slow, or lots of time left over. So I would welcome any questions that you have, or you can also contact me at this email address.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Judy. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop those into the live Q&A or the discussion. Judy, there was some just comments about, for example, as an instructional designer, I feel it's my obligation to model the expectations we have of our faculty. And I thought that was a really great comment that was left in our discussion area.
I agree, yeah.
Here's a question. Where do we get access to the slides from these presentations? So those should be listed, the PowerPoint should be under the handouts section. Oh, and she says, looks like if they're not there currently, they will be up later. Yes, you're welcome. All right. Any other questions? I thought that was really, it's funny. I think I've seen similar presentations like this, but I learn something new every time. There's a question. Can you show us the Adobe thing? The Adobe thing now.
Oh, yeah, I can try. Let's see. The problem is that my laptop apparently updated last night, and so everything that I expected to work this morning is not working. So let's see. Oh, it's saying that it's expired. I think it's because I tried to log in with a different username, so it wasn't accepting. I tried to use my home account instead of my school account, so I'm afraid that I can't show it to you right now without backing out of this presentation completely. I can try to show you the Microsoft Word one though. Let's see. And I apologize again for not having this all up and running. I should have checked my computer when I first got up this morning. I just didn't. All right, so let's check this one out. So this is a Word document. And I'm just going to make it a little wider. So if I go up to Tools and do Check Accessibility, this is telling me that I have some errors. And it's going to tell me, just one second. Sometimes it takes a little while because it goes through the entire document and it has some things that it needs to check. So it's saying that this is missing alternative text on picture 35, which is this little thing up here. Also the reading order, it's not sure about that. And it's got some hard to read contrast. And sure enough, this would be a contrast issue because it is really hard to read that even for somebody whose eyes aren't perfect, but you know, not no visual disabilities at any rate. So this gives you Microsoft products give you the very basics in accessibility, but it's by no means everything. And then I really wish I could show this to you, but I don't. I would say if you want, I can do a Zoom with you later on. Just contact me through email, and I can show you how to do that. I'm so sorry that I can't show it to you now because it really is a lot more extensive than the one that Microsoft puts out. It looks for metadata in documents so that, you know, it's looking to make sure that you have an actual title instead of the file name, because that's not going to help with someone who's needing accessibility. It's going to look at your tagging structure, the reading order, making sure that, you know, that things go in a logical order on the page. It doesn't jump from the first one head to a paragraph at the bottom of the page back to the top. You know, it wants people to be able to experience things the same way that a sighted person would.
All right, looks like we have more questions coming in. Would it be better to make versions of PDFs, etc., that were aimed at disabled and those that were not? So 2 copies of the same thing, one that is aimed to be accessible and perhaps simplified, not simple content, just simpler, cleaner design.
I mean, it's six of one, half a dozen of the other. You can either spend a lot of time creating 2 different documents, or you can spend a lot of time creating one accessible and non-accessible. I mean, not that it's non-accessible, but it's an accessible document that people who don't need the accessibility features would still be able to benefit from. So it's kind of wherever you want to throw your time. But I would say probably I would do one document, making that one document accessible. That way there's fewer documents that you need to update. There's fewer files that you have to keep track of. And it's a good idea to also keep accessibility always at the front of your mind when you're creating documents. The more you use this muscle, the easier it'll be to incorporate it moving forward, because you'll start to get into the habit of doing certain things, designing in certain ways.
And the other question, how do you access the accessibility function in Microsoft?
Okay, so Microsoft, you would go to, in Mac, it's using this tools. There's a check accessibility here. I believe for Windows machines, you have to go to this tell me what you want to do and type in accessibility, and then it comes up as one of the options. I don't think there is a tools menu, but I could be wrong, in Windows. I hope that answered the question.
And someone says, on my PC, it's listed under review. So that's
okay.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, because it's hard when you don't have both systems. It's hard to know.
Yes, another comment says, review in the ribbon, check accessibility. That's
Excellent.
great. Right?
Hive
yes.
mind.
Let's see. There's another question. Do you have those websites in a handout?
I don't. I have what I shared today was a PDF of my PowerPoint, so I'm happy to send that to you, or I can just, you know, make a handout with all of the websites. Just contact me through email.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, and someone has added your link to your presentation as well in the Q&A section.
Excellent.
So
I may know who did that.
let's see. Oh, and there's another comment for PC or file, then info, inspect document, check for issues, check accessibility. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Well, that was a wonderful presentation. I really,
Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you
yeah,
all
a
for
lot of people are
joining.
saying thank you. That was great.
Well, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the
Yes.
symposium.
One more. Yes, everyone says thanks.
One
So,
more.
definitely give us your feedback on this session. There should be a survey that pops up when you leave. I know yesterday we had some technical issues, so we were not able to gather feedback on every session from yesterday. So if you did attend a session, we ask that you go back to that session and leave again, and it should pop up a survey to give feedback on that session. Your next session today is at 1 p.m. So during this break, we encourage you to check out the meeting hub, connect with others, especially our other attendees, presenters, if you have questions. And to leave this session, you will click back to timeline in the top left-hand corner. All right. Yes, thank you so much. Everyone's like, yes, I learned something new from you and appreciate it. So that's great. Thank you, Judy.
Great. Thank you.